Hello, welcome to the newest and first in the thread of this kind of Zen electronics and my Patreon creations. Um, Photography, I've been continuing just to document little bits here and there, but the photography that is more kind of relevant is photos of me making contraptions like this. Dun, 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 dun. Little machine is like a test thing. Every little wire, every little joint of solder. What is this anyway? So this is like a it's like a, you know, sometimes people have a light and a sensor and someone comes outside and turns on the light, but I had this running in the stairwell where it gets dark at night, and people are always walking up in the dark and asking for the light to be turned on. But the light switch is at the top of the stairs. But it's so much more than that, you know. The pixels, they're all like individually. They listen to commands through the wires. They're not just turn off by electricity. They turn themselves on and off because you talk to them and say, "Hey, pixel number whatever, pixel number 4, turn on green and blue and make this color," you know. Or you can just generally have a program that says, "Turn off everything if there's no one moving around. But if they're moving around, then turn on some lights." So it's like a lot of projects trying to join hands and be something else. Really, there's this is a computer, a microcontroller, and the chip on it is this tiny chip, little square thing. Okay, so that chip, you can put that onto something like this board or something similar and program it up like you have with this test one, and then you don't need this anymore. And then if you've seen my Facebook, which probably you haven't, but slowly, one by one, I went through the steps of here's another contraption that I made. I went through the steps of, first I had just 1 or 2 wires turning on a light. Okay, this thing has this number pad as well, but it's not connected. And this thing also relies on that little computer, but until I add a chip to control it. So here we go. And on the back side, all kinds of soldering that I had to design it and make it. And I've never done that. You know, the most I've soldered is like some bits inside my guitar when the guitar didn't work right, and I had to like make it work again, changing the plug on it or changing some switch around and resoldering it. I could barely solder 2 bits of wire together, which is an insult that in the electronics industry. That guy can't even solder 2 bits of wire together, you know. But yes, I was aware of that insult, and I thought, yes, well, that is me. I am that guy who can barely solder 2 bits of wire together. But you can learn anything if you want to, and if you have the time and the will. And I've had the will for so long. Honestly, that was one of those things that I learned at university. Getting one of those breadboards, which is what this big white thing is, like a big plastic thing with lots of holes in it. They call it a breadboard because it's sort of, I guess it looks like a breadboard, that breadboard white plastic. But they had some breadboards and they had some logic chips, and you connected them together and learned how to do, you know, digital electronic design. So I always had that on my experience or knowledge, digital electronic design. But and I have used it, but mostly not as the guy who sticks the things together, but more as the computer programmer. I worked in America when I was around 24. I had a friend that I'd made who was a guitar player, and he was also a video game maker, and he went off to America to make video games, and he gave me a contract. Probably shouldn't have been there working, but I was working as a contractor, so it's like location independent. I wasn't getting paid in America. I was just getting paid for the work, and I just happened to be in America meeting them. I was there for about 6 months, and it was all just around programming a chip, so knowing a microchip and how that would make music. So I was a musician. That's how they met me, and I was a computer programmer. So I made a program that played music. I made the sounds, like a synthesizer chip I had to make sounds with. Speaking of that, I should get one of those chips again. I remember it was quite fun. Yeah, and anyway, why is this topic of this video Zen and deep contemplating meditation? Well, Zen is one of those things, it's like this word that supposedly comes from Buddhism, a kind of Buddhism, a more one of those modern Mahayana Buddhisms that I think is a little bit questionable in many. There's so many variations of calling themselves Buddhisms, a lot of them haven't even got much interest in the original Buddha. People, historic Buddha, they call him, but they're like, yeah, but that's just the historic Buddha. We've got the second Buddha. He's actually the first Buddha, but reincarnated, and then they have the whole systems of reincarnation, or patriarchs, royalty passing on from the wisdom from one leader to another, and all that. So Zen Buddhism is like a Japanese translation of Chan Buddhism, which is a Chinese thing, which is imported scriptures somehow from India, and a 1,000 years later, they like backdated their lineage to probably all the way as nearly back to Buddha. Somehow they created a lineage and said it's the original Buddhism, and then, by the time you get to modern day, Zen Buddhist priests could just be anyone. They married, they smoke cigarettes, they have meetings, have little houses. And so if it can be anything and anyone, I feel like I can adopt the term, because when I was living in a monastery, which isn't really a monastery, but they like to call it that for legal purposes, it looked like one. It had a huge temple, it had lots of huts, it had a few monks like me wandering around, and about twice as many nuns as monks. And it didn't have that many. It had mostly lay people. But I was their willing slave, let's say, until I wasn't willing. And so during that time, it got bigger. When I first went there, it was quite isolated and small, few people. Only in summer would it sort of explode out into a big white teaching tent with this guru that everyone was there to hang out with, and they needed more and more technology. They just, I understood. At first I thought it was all in aid of something, but later I realized it was just in aid of having more, building a business, and then just trying to act like you're not, trying to make excuses why everyone has to build it. So I had to build a lot of things, mostly they were computers, because it's like you're either going to fix really bad old donated shit computers, or you're going to get some kind of semblance of a budget and build it something new that gets 10 times as much work accomplished, and then proves that we should all use actual computers and not rubbish. And then the more that you succeed based on making something workable, then it starts to sort of create products and texts and videos, editing, and sound files, recordings that turn into audio tapes, and then CDs, and then later they turn into sort of streaming material as everything went from physical media to sort of internet media, So I carried them all through that, and more I was running bigger and bigger server farms under the house. They had this big old barn kind of, and then under that was a sort of a dining hall, and then they had this big farmhouse, and under that was some kind of old place where maybe you kept the tool shed, or maybe once it had cows inside of it, I don't know. It was just this ancient French building. And so eventually, because of the way wiring and all the offices, that house was had two, at the top floor it had this kind of shrine room, and it was all holier than thou teacher area, and his had this old people's home, which is like his mother and his aunt eventually came there and was cared for. Should make sure I'm in focus after putting stuff near the lens. And then on the first floor there were offices. There was a huge dining related or kitchen related to the dining hall building, and then there was offices of La Source or Lerabling, and accounting and reception, managers. There was a few offices, and then there was another kind of a few more open spaces where everyone else was crammed in. It would be like 3 people and through winter, and turn into 20 people or more, just trying to fight for space and this little internet connection. And so then eventually I got a server room under that, on the underneath layer, the sort of like basement layer, which you could access by walking around the back, because the one side was higher than the back side, and there was these kind of hobbit kind of small curvy doors with barn opening doors, and nobody would really find you much there because it just looked like a tool shed. They'd stuff a couple of carpenters in there every now and then, and so then we walled off an area and made it into a sort of a server room. And so in there I found my Zen. That's why this whole thread. So to get to the point, the Zen moments, I'm in this monastery thing. I'm not going to use the C word. I'm sort of trying to leave that in the past, but there you can go back in time and hear me talk about all that stuff. The main thing is that I just enjoyed the peace of building things, right? Making things, figuring out problems, making it, and then those things were the solution to other things. People needed to store data to share as a working group, so that's a server. So I made the server. A lot of people in those days used to think a server is different from a computer. It's like a different, yes and no, it might be, but if you don't have money, then it's just a computer that you just put different software on it, or you set it up. You could even use the same software, just the way you set it up, to run all the time and always be there, because you never know who's going to be working at what hours. And I created all these like firewall computers to share the internet and control the flow of internet, so that it worked for a lot more people and blocked out sort of viruses and attackers from the outside world, and as you get anywhere that you have internet. And slowly over time we got faster internet, and the more, it was like crazy, the more internet you got, you'd get like 50% more people than what you had internet for. So 1 minute you have more internet and you have enough for everyone, but then suddenly the growth, it's like internet would breed people who couldn't cope life without internet would end up in this monastery. And so then they're all because it has internet, and they could somehow wangle their way to convince people that they were there for retreat, but they needed internet. Then more and more people were there, and more for longer working, because that was, if you have internet and you have products and you have people writing and living, they just have that demand, and that pays for itself. It somehow turns into money for that organization. So eventually I woke up to this, like, not spiritual side being more and more the reality than everything else. And so I was continuing to work, make stuff, but my health was declining. You know, one day I was fixing some computer in this freezing cold room because of all the air conditioners there to maintain the servers, to stop them from overheating. I had all this bank of air conditioners by that time. I mean, it went from just being a few computers on a bench under the house in one thing to a huge, not huge, like cramped, but yet, you know, 3 or 4 tall racks full of these like thin servers that are designed to make the most of the space you have for them. I mean, insane amounts. By that time there was a department that I'd created, and another department related to video editing that this other guy had created, that were just hugely greedy for discs and discs and discs of storage, and to keep all the video editing materials online so they could edit products. And it was just this media machine. And at some point they wanted to build a kind of electronic shrine where you put coins in and the lights light up like candle looking lights, as a sort of a way of getting tourists to, because they had tourism, they had like tours of the temple. It was more of a tourist attraction for outsiders and a business for the insiders, and a retreat center for the, you know, people who signed up for that. So they wanted to learn from the East, where all of those, if you go to monasteries and temples, Wats in the East, in the Asian world, not all of them, some of them are kind of reformist, but some of them they just always have money generating thing to keep people fed. Even though they get fed, they actually have the practice where they walk around getting alms, getting food every morning. But on top of that, for other needs, they have people donating money into little begging bowls, but they're really designed for coins. And, you know, all kinds of electronic gizmos, like this weird thing sometimes you see, like a skeleton or some old in a coffin, and you put a coin and it sits up like it's robotic. It sits up and says, and some speaker says something in Asian language I don't understand, like probably said thank you. They have like fortune telling machines where lights spin around in a circle and eventually tells you a number, and you go down and pick out a piece of paper with a fortune with that number on it. So like say there's 40 different fortunes, and like if you just feel like having your fortune read, you'll submit to any kind of rubbish like that. But the fortunes are always really, they're like fortune cookies. There's a bunch of text that's generic but specific enough for you to like go, yeah, that sounds good, I like that. I think I wonder if I have one of those fortunes handy, because I have, for fun, engaged in that a couple of times, just as an auspicious thing, because even though I'm not into the whole organized religion thing anymore, yeah, I've got one right here, tucked away inside my, as I traveled, I had wrote poems and ideas, stories in this book. I haven't done it for quite a long time. Now it even has photos inside of it, like my wife and one of her kind of cousins that comes over sometimes. So what is it? What does this say? It's got 3 languages. It's got Thai. It's got Chinese, because there's a lot of Chinese temples. And it's got English, because there's tourists. They've thought of everything. Though misery is through. So that's always a good sign, isn't it? Misery is through. Your family and comrades are all happy, but you yourself still feel uneasy. Though misery is through, your family and comrades are all happy, but you yourself still feel uneasy. See, my situation, it's generic. Of course I do. Who doesn't feel uneasy? You just tell people what to feel. This is like cult programming in itself. The stuff that these kind of guru people spout out, it's like they learn from these fortunes that there's generic things that everyone will resonate with. Merit making and alms giving will fulfill you, because this is in a fortune machine which is designed for alms, taking alms. So of course it's going to say that. And you must believe that because you've gone to one of these places. So chances of that resonating with you is pretty high. Don't be greedy. That means let go of your money. If you grasp all, you'll lose all. Be patient. Like an archaism said after planting a tree. I think they mean an old saying. Like an old saying said, after planting a tree, you have to wait a while for its fruit. So they're like imagining that your donation is like planting a tree, and the merit is the fruit. Or perhaps you're going and doing retreats in some temple, and wisdom is the merit. Whatever way you decide to interpret it. You'll have good fortune and find your lost treasure, because everyone's lost something, even if it's not actually lost. They lose a relationship. So that's very generic and very easy to resonate. Asking of a spouse, you're likely to find a good one. So that resonated with me, of course, because that was around the time that I'm in that relationship, looking for that woman. So this one actually isn't from the time that I was. It's from before I met Supachaya. But I had a girlfriend at that time, so I probably thought that it was meaningful. For you who are sick will get better. For other matters, all seems to be good too. So this is like supposedly the divination part. If you're looking for a wife, you'll find a good one. If you're sick, you're going to get better, because, usually you do. I mean, what are they going to say? You're never going to get better, you're going to die. They're not going to say that. So, but we're told to, if we want to enjoy these things, we have to turn off our cynicism, you know. I just want to store this back rather than forget and let it fall out, even though it is worthless. It's historical. It's like I have to learn from it, even if it's stupid. You can learn from the worst. In fact, you should. Those are the things you should learn from. The things where you acknowledge that you've been wrong are the greatest opportunities for you to change. I mean, so much wisdom can be stuck in recruiting manuals, you know, books of wisdom, but they're not really for that purpose. They're for the purpose of making you join their organization of wisdom. Anyway, they wanted electronics. They basically asked if it was possible, and I said, yeah, sure, it's possible. I know a little bit about how to do it because I'd had one of those things. Here's another one that I have that is the one I'm sort of working on now. It's a touch screen attached with little pins. It sits on, it's like two boards. One is a touch screen and it sits on top of the other thing, which is the same as the one I showed you before, a little computer, microcontroller. So you can just pull that off. And you can plug it in and make, you know, first I made some lights, then I made a matrix of LEDs, and then that, essentially that's what that is. It's a much bigger matrix, 320 by 240, which is huge number of pixels to control, but it's also a tiny amount compared to a modern telephone or computer screen, which is high definition, which is just in the thousands by thousands kind of resolution these days. But when you're individually like writing pixels, you know, writing software, that's a plenty number of pixels. So I'd used one of these, that's why I'm talking about it again, okay, to make a kind of a video mixer. I just found some project that, because I didn't have the money to buy a video mixer, right? I kind of bought a rack mounted thing for 1,000 Australian or American dollars, but it was just a thing that you plug the different input video, high definition from like cameras or computers, and then you could choose. It was a switcher, but not a switcher that disconnects and reconnects, a switcher that just changes through software which thing is going out. And so it had one output which had a mix that showed you all little tiny cameras sort of divvied up, and which one you were going to switch to, and like a video mixer basically as an output. And it had software that you could like control it with on a computer, so you could sort of mix it. So anyway, some dude had made it so that you could just have that, and something that gave it network connection, a different kind of shield. What they call this a shield. It sits on top and plugs in around the sides. And it was a little bit of a project. I had to get a touch screen, which is the same as that basically, but bigger and high definition, and then sit this thing inside of it and power this little computer board from the power that ran the touch screen, and then take the touch screen interface into the computer. So basically you touch the screen and drag your finger and you say, this video source, like camera 1, switch to that, and it comes on the output, and it would get its feed of video from that rack. Anyway, it was very cool. It was like to other people, ignoring all the stuff that made it come together, it was just like a little screen that I plugged in and touched and controlled the video. And they were like, "Where did that come from?" It's like, "Well, I made it." And I thought that was great. I was impressed with myself. It was just me getting free software and a cheap little thing, and I had to wire things together. But I did, for my part, make it. I didn't understand all of it, but I'm a computer guy, so I understood most of it. And now I want to understand all of it. And there was a time after that, because I'd done that, so I was able to say honestly when they said, "What's possible? Can you make something?" I said, "Yeah, sure. I mean, I can. How long it will take me and costs, we have to buy lights and work with a carpenter and wire it all up and make a program that detects the coin and then turns on some display." And we had all ideas, but by that time I ended up buying a little kit, but by that time there were always people fighting for my attention and different projects and people in different countries needing to get ready to rise up to the ever increasingly complicated standards of video mixing and video capture, multiple cameras, quickly edited and output before the retreat's even over. The professional world. And so it was just one of my ambitions that was left behind. So now, in this lovely home with my lovely wife and the not so lovely coronavirus lockdown, I for my own sanity, I I thought, what can I do? All right, it's time. I kept on eyeing off on when I would be buying some gadget to fix something. Or I kept on eyeing off these kits, and I had that feeling like I want to do the kit, so I'll buy it. But I really want to go further. I want to make a lot more kind of serious projects. I want to actually end up making things that are useful around the house and then potentially sellable. But I also want the knowledge to enrich the work that I offer to my clients. Sometimes my clients want repairs of computers, or sometimes they want me to make a product like these other kind of small computers there's these little tiny computers called Raspberry Pis. They're bigger than this, and they're almost as powerful as a kind of computer that you would use in your home as your main laptop. They only cost about $20, $30, $40, $50, depending what level you get. Amazingly cheap, considering people pay thousands. You get that, and you get a screen and a little memory card, and there you go. You've got a whole computer. So this last couple of months, especially this last month, it all started to come together, and I had the breadboards, I have the wires, and now I order chips. Maybe they come a few days later, maybe they come weeks later, or even months later if you buy them from China. And what are you going to do? Are you going to hate on China and refuse to buy stuff from there? If you buy almost any of these electronic components from anywhere, they come from China. Sometimes they're made in Japan, but they're usually made in China. Even the Japanese get their things made in China for certain, just because, you buy them in America or on an American website, and this touch screen would be, not this side, would be like $50 or $40. But I got it for $2. Like, really? $2 for that. And it's not just a video screen, it's a touch screen. I mean, I should probably power it up, show you. You get this phone charger, and you can run a whole computer these days off a 5-volt phone charger. This thing has the old big chunky USB. So here, USB. Is it going to do anything? I wonder if I just blew it up. That would be funny, wouldn't it? Well, normally I don't. I think I didn't blow it up. I think it's just that the USB charger doesn't sit right. Okay, there you go. There you go. It's already running the little hello world. I drew a box and I wrote some text in it. That's like the beginning of the program. You can see all the little lights inside. Power lights. And look, it's a touch screen. See, I'm writing on it. I mean, the software that makes that happen it's surprisingly simple. Oh no, I erased everything. It's surprisingly simple. I think if you run your finger down too low, it's like hitting the erase ball. Or if you go here, you can change color. Different colors. Anyway, these computers, you can get them for like $3. This touchscreen, $2. And the educational value of it, and potential to actually, in a way, it's a way more useful than your phone. Not really, but it's so accessible. It's so accessible that it's more useful. It's like if you want to make an app on your phone, there's a bit of a barrier. It's probably not a real barrier if you know what you're doing. You can write a very simple telephone program, but you get full control. Like these things, what's great about them is that they have all these holes to put wires in, and then you connect them to stuff. You don't have to solder you can solder things together if you want to make the project into an actual like permanent thing. But when you're just testing ideas and learning, you can just plug little wires into these holes. Like you can see them all floating around off this one, right? And you can see the holes that the wires go into. This is the +5 volt wire, and if you plug it in the right +5 volt place, you probably should be very careful. You do have to be a bit careful, but that's why it's great, because they're not that expensive. Because if you did plug it in and blew things up somehow, well, you haven't lost a whole $100, $50, $20. You've only lost time, and you can get the part back for a few dollars if you know where to buy it cheap. I haven't blown anything up. I've been careful enough. If there's one thing I've learned with computers and building, be very, very careful. So, where's the Zen? The Zen of this is, it's just a feeling of concentration, building concentration. By doing it, I build my concentration. This one-pointed focus is one of the goals of certain types of meditation. So for that, it's definitely makes me feel like very strong, deep meditation. And then there's contemplation of the meaning understanding that some new concepts around the electronics. There's all kinds of, physics. Electronics have a lot of physics involved, like equations, resistance, inductance, capacitance, voltage, all the different units of measure, vast sort of from tiny amounts to big amounts, microfarads all the way up to a whole farad. I don't think I have anything that does a whole farad. That would probably be really big, and you get electrocuted accidentally if you discharged it. And how it's like a kind of electronics to me feels like being a magician with magic rocks, that if you touch them together in the right way, you get magical effects. Like that sensor, to you who have a sensor, it's just some device that works. You don't necessarily wonder how it works. But to me, it's a little tiny, what they call a infrared module, and it stores the sort of way things are, and then if things change in what it's reading, it notices, and the circuit you've built triggers. It says, all right, well, things look like this, but now they look different. So something's happening. Someone's walked in, and I've detected them. And there you go. It doesn't know what's going on at all. It just knows. It doesn't know anything. It just has this sort of a state, and then the state changes when someone gets in front of it. And then when they don't move for a while, it probably just goes, okay, well, no one's moving, so maybe there's nothing there. But then you move again, and it triggers it. And if you want to know how that works, then probably some kind of physics and equations are involved, and then that means thinking about it, if it's not second nature to you. And that's what contemplation is about. It's like going from the I don't know to the sort of realization. And then if you do the Tibetan idea of contemplative meditation is that you have two phases, Che Gom and Jo Gom, and one is contemplating and the other one is resting. So there's a kind of deep satisfaction too, because you, just like you might think through some kind of, where there's smoke, then there's fire, kind of syllogism. And why do we know there's fire? Is there a fire that doesn't have smoke? No, doesn't seem so. In fact there is, but for the purposes of that syllogism, there's always, even if there's a fire without smoke, well, that's fine, because if there's smoke, it comes from fire. Smoke doesn't come from not a fire. Fires may not have smoke, but smoke definitely comes from a fire. See, there's already more to that, more layers of it. Does it mean that where there's fire there's smoke? No, not necessarily. It might be a smokeless fire. Like the sun. Does the sun have smoke? It may, or it may not. Maybe the smoke just instantly gets incinerated and burned, so it can't really have smoke. Maybe there is smoke, but it's so hot that it's in this form of plasma that doesn't look like smoke. So smoke, as we know it, can't exist in such a heat. Or you could just say, it's the smoke of the sun is not like any smoke we know. It's sun smoke, and you could call scattered particles from the sun, it's smoke, like where there's light, there's a sun. And is light the smoke of the sun? Because where there's light, there's the sun, Are they equivalent? So things like that come back also to things like on this one, all it is a bunch of lights, right? These two number things are called 7-segment displays because it has 7 bits of light, 3 along the top, a middle bar, and 3 along the bottom, and then you can make it anything from 1 to 9. You can make it say A, B, C, D, E, F. You can make it do the whole alphabet, although it doesn't really look like the alphabet for certain letters because it just doesn't have enough complexity. So they made more complex ones than this that I'll try. And then there's these little resistors that are just there to stop these from blowing up, from having too much power. They're kind of like turning the electrical tap down. And then there's these chips. Well, that's more complicated. They basically take one message at a time and then stack them up until you have enough messages that you have like 8 sort of on-off switches that could turn on and off some lights when you tell it, okay, now turn them on. So this, you sort of like on, off, on from the computer, and then it stores it inside the chip, and then the chip, when you tell it, it goes, okay, now show, and it changes what lights are turned on. And there's 2 of those, and they're sort of connected to each other. So, and then there's a button. It's just has ground on one side and voltage on the other, and a resistor. And this thing is another story altogether because it's a little computer, really. It has its own little computer to kind of decide which lights are on and off. So it's just a bigger version of that, right? It just has a sort of a whole bunch of sets of pixels. So it's just a lighting controller. That's just many lights that you can, and if you control it yourself, if you make it yourself, you could send wires out and make big lights on the wall, and they make them do beautiful patterns. And you could make a whole TV set out of pixels. People do. That's what those outdoor ones are. The same goes for this other one. So that's what I've been doing, and I'm gonna try and maybe drop in some as I'm talking about this. Hopefully I have made little videos of the phases that I went through. Maybe I'll do a little montage of the phases I went through from getting the kit and then getting more things and doing little experiments to getting to the point where, like, getting this thing up and running. I thought I would be there for days. I was just like, once I focused on it, an hour later it was running. And then when I focused on it another day for a couple of hours, I sort of worked out what the program was doing and started to hack my way through it, remove the bits I didn't want, make my own bits, and now it's starting to be something. I mean, what can it be? It's complex, but it could just be that I have a picture of a button like turn on light. Okay, and then when it turns on, it actually lights up and in a different way to sort of feedback that yes, the light is on. So magnificently complex to do the same thing as a button, which has just 2 wires going into it. But that's just the way things are these days. And so the Zen is just the feeling of personal development that I get with meditative effects, So I'm going to leave it there, and as months go, I'll just talk about what I created and the meditative effects of how this month has been going, and is the Zen of electronics working for me? And a lot of it's a whole make-up movement of people who want to fix things, who enjoy learning. I mean, you find people who knew nothing when they got started, and months later they're creating things that don't exist, that turn little tiny computers like that into something that plugs into a video screen, even though that's not what it was designed for at all. It was designed to not work with a video screen, and yet they make it work with one. And then they say, I didn't know any of this, I just looked on YouTube and watched, and then I figured out this, and look. And people buy their stuff, they get little circuit boards made and fill them with components and sell them, and then they're as amazed as anyone what they're doing. So I might end up there too, or maybe not. I don't know how far and what direction. I don't really have a plan. I just like to see how things unfold, and if other jobs come my way, I put those aside and focus on what I have to do for my family and income. But if I don't have that, I have my Zen electronic experiments to sort of keep me satisfied, and it's better than thinking about the political things and pandemic things all the time. So, see you next month.